frame. So I do believe this is an important consideration in terms of the agencies of our students, of our learners, educators, as well as the education managers and leaders and all the important stakeholders. How can we achieve this? Prof. Kat, thank you so much for the opportunity, and you can continue to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really wonderful welcome and that thought-provoking commentary around where we are, how do we transcend, how do we learn from the past and what we've been through, and how do we, most importantly, continue with learning, no matter the crisis, no matter the circumstances. So thank you very much for that really warm welcome, Dr. Seyama. It was wonderful to have you with us, and please continue to contribute and collaborate as we go through the day. Thank you.
We'll do that. Thank you very much.
So with that, everybody, like Dr. Seyama had alluded to, our topic really focuses on education now post the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you would know, we're not clearly out of the woods yet. We are still very much steeped in a world of uncertainty. And with crises coming at us from directions that perhaps we have no way of knowing. And so we've got to be prepared for all eventualities. The recent floods in Kwazulu-Natal already allude us to the fact that we need to be prepared and we need to be able to take action no matter what comes at us. At the end, we cannot lose generations of children into losses of learning. And so with that, we are going to be moving forward with a new addition to our program. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome into our forum and into our space. Well, first of all, let us do this exercise. We are going to put in a poll just to get a sense in the room, how people have experienced, coming out of the pandemic. What is that experience like for people in the audience? So Bhavik, if you don't mind, if you could just set up the poll so people can go on, and just click a choice, so your experiences of education post the COVID-19 pandemic, wherever you find yourself. Was the experience excellent? Was the learnings from the pandemic, put into strategic plans that motored ahead full force? Was it a really good experience with many opportunities? Was it a neutral experience where there was a bit of good and a bit of, learnings that had to be put into place? Or was it a very bad, extremely excruciating experience that had to be navigated? Or at the end, was it really the most terrible experience? So if you could choose, one of those, so we can just get a sense in the room of how people have experienced education post the pandemic, it would be lovely to see how the room is feeling at the moment. So I don't know if people from the audience can just go ahead and submit their choice, and Bhavik will then allow us to have a look at that choice. So while we're waiting for you to choose your particular option, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce someone who is very hard to describe actually, in the form of Dr. Nehemiah Latola. He will be graduating on Saturday and accept graciously the end of his journey toward the doctorate as a chemist, but he is also a man of many gifts. And the one gift that he's sharing us with today is his gift as a poet. So Nehemiah, I'd like to welcome you into the room and for you to then render for us a performance of poetry that sets the scene and gets us going into this conversation of education post the COVID-19 pandemic.
Teaching is akin to the ocean, like how it constantly, committedly pursues the shores to encounter its path south unwaveringly and present anew. It's in the earnest strikes at noon, how it swells.
Sorry to disturb you, Nehemiah. We lost you for a minute or two. I think it just got frozen for just a little while. If you could just maybe begin again. I don't know if it was only on my side, but I lost you for a little bit.
Okay, am I present now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much. The ocean. Teaching is akin to the ocean, like how it constantly, committedly pursues the shore to encounter its past self unwaveringly and present anew. It is in the earnest strikes at noon, how it swells full body at the new moon just to show off its calm at dawn. Yes, there is so much we can learn from the ocean, like how it too can become a passage for destruction, ushering in those that would plunder rather than aid, murder rather than care the stranger they encounter. Sometimes walking on the shore barefoot can be incredibly uncomfortable, like a people's history told by its foes, a people whose descendants toil in the shallows, unable to swim. Grandmother said, rest was for the wicked, like how the majestic camel can also be floored by a single straw, how it only took a virus to uncover the inability to breathe of a people drowning. In 2 rooms, makeshift homes drowning. In if I don't work today, we can't eat drowning. In country under lockdown, another breadwinner retrenched drowning. And these are the shores we pursue, of a people with misplaced histories, too afraid to seek, lest the shiny rainbow nation uncovered oblique. So I say, let's go back to the ocean that also our ancestors keep. Like them, we need to teach telling stories of hate, not just those of love and peace, recognizing context as weapon and not just thief. Let's be responsive to the waves, resilient in our pursuit of the shore, and relevant in how we navigate. Yes, a day at the ocean, discomfort with it brings. But if we stay the course, I promise it provides opportunity to live, to heal, to sing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity to be able to render a performance for you guys this afternoon and engage with you on this critical time in higher education and in teaching and learning of education post the pandemic. I shared a poem titled The Ocean that reflects on that movement of where we were, where we find ourselves, and where we hope to be post-COVID-19. Prof. Ket is a wonderful friend of mine who I met when I was but a young budding academic from chemistry with many questions around education and teaching, because for me it wasn't enough to simply just teach how I was taught, and really wanting to meet my learner or the student I encountered in the classroom where they were at. So thank you for this opportunity this afternoon, Prof. Ket. I will now be setting the context of this afternoon's engagement by performing a found poem that I believe was collected by the principals of this project about their journey, reflecting on a letter from a blog post. So I share with you the found poem. We have to be deliberate in listening to children. Their stories must be heard. We need to help them make sense of an upside down world. Greet children with stories and books. Remove their fears through listening, caring, and loving them. They need us. They've missed us, their teachers. As torchbearers of hope and beacons of light, a teacher is an essential connection between what is and what can be. They will return with a new history that will need to be identified and made sense of. Resist the pressure from whatever powers that may be. Those who are in a hurry to fix kids, and make up for lost times. Models no longer apply. Benchmarks are no longer valid. Children have so much to share about the world they live in. So begin by helping them make sense of what for all of us has been unimaginable. Thank you.
Well, I really hope that was an amazing treat for everybody, as it always is with me. Nehemiah, you blow me away with the way in which you are able to perform words. And like Nehemiah said, the second poem was actually derived by a group of school principals in an exercise that I led with them around the time, when we were grappling of allowing our children back into schools. I really hope that, the creativity around putting together words that give us an essence of what it has been like for people in education has stimulated you enough to participate as we proceed forward into the conversation. I will post the words of the poetry into the chat. So if people want to have a closer look at the words, you're very welcome to do that. Thank you so much, Nehemiah, for wowing us. And another thing that Nehemiah is going to do, which is a little bit different for our conversations in terms of how we usually get things done, is throughout the sessions, Nehemiah will be collating a poem that gathers all of the learnings that we have as people contribute through their presentations, as well as the audience starts to engage. We will then end our webinar with a poem that we collectively create via the handiwork of our wonderful new doctor, Dr. Latola. Thank you so much, Dr. Latola. That was really inspiring. Bhavik, I don't know if you have the results of the poll, so we could just get into that before we start with our presenters.
Second, just a minute. Can you see it?
Oh my goodness, look at this amazing, set of results that we have here. I'm really blown away by the fact, look, I did experience that a lot of people would go for the neutral option because I know there's been a bit of both good and bad that has happened to people. But it really, really is such a good sign to see that a lot of people have actually gone into the space of a very good experience. In other words, post the pandemic, getting into education and getting things back on track and moving forward strategically and in ways that we've derived from the learnings of the COVID almost seems to be a part of what people are doing. And that is excellent. I mean, I'm really happy to see a lot of people in the very good experience space. And then, of course, we do understand that not every context would have had a good experience. Some people, in about 13%, have had a very bad experience. A very small proportion have had the worst experience ever. And for those people, my heart goes out to you. I do know that you do what you do in very trying conditions. And so I can really understand when you say that things have been hard for you. And we are with you in spirit and in thoughts and in prayer. But certainly I'm hoping that we can learn from everybody that's online at the moment. So thank you so much, Bhavik, for this wonderful result. And so with that, it brings us to our very first speaker, who is a teacher that has just begun a career. She's an early career teacher. And she started her teaching experience in 2020. So for those of you who know of teachers who were prepared at university to actually teach face-to-face, and suddenly they entered into the teaching environment, they hardly had 3 months of school, COVID-19 hit, and they were suddenly thrust into the deep end as novice teachers. Ms. Khomotso Ramogolo is a student of mine as well as a teacher, and she is studying her B.Ed honors at the moment. Khomotso is particularly special because what she has experienced post-COVID-19 piggybacks very well with a self-study research that she's doing as part of her honors degree. And her topic grapples with how did teachers who had the opportunity to teach students online during COVID-19, how did they experience getting back to full-time contact classes after the pandemic, and there was this mandate to then get back to classes? And one of the things that Khomotso found is that there was this huge socialization issue. Kids that had now started to get used to sitting and being taught in front of a computer screen now suddenly had to go back into contact teaching and learning, and there was a gap. But I'm going to not do any spoilers, and I'm going to leave Khomotso to continue with that. Khomotso teaches physical sciences in I think it's a private school, Khomotso. And we thought that her contribution will be particularly wonderful because there was this energy of everybody towards saying, oh, we can't have children in our classroom, let's move on to online learning. And what's particularly relevant about Khomotso's conversation is that things are not always as easy as it seems or as clear-cut as it seems. And so I'm going to allow Khomotso to take over and then give us some rendition of her experience as a new teacher hitting COVID-19 full force, and then now coming back to contact classes, and how was she able to navigate that space? Over to you, Khomotso, and best of luck.
Thank you, Prof. Kat. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity and taking the time out of your day to be here. As Prof has already introduced me, my name is Khomotso, and today I will be avoiding trying to put you to sleep for the next 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm actually a physical science and natural science teacher at a private school called ESCA out in Johannesburg. So what I do is I teach physical sciences and natural sciences, but I had also been coordinating the GED maths at the school. So most of my responsibilities at the school also include handling the assessments and basically handling the curriculum delivery at the school. So my topic today, or rather my business of the day here today, is I'll be sharing my experiences with you about my how it was when we had to transition from being online to being face-to-face again post-lockdown. Now, I prefer saying post-lockdown because now we are still very much in the pandemic, and to say post-pandemic would kind of be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I'm just going to take an opportunity here to just share my screen with you so that you can be able to see my entire presentation. Just please give me a second. Prof, can you please confirm that you are able to see my presentation?
We are able to see it. Thank you, Khomotso.
Thank you very much. So how did I get here? So I'm a scientist at heart, and as it turns out, I'm a teacher as well. So I attained my Bachelor of Science degree as an undergrad, and I majored in chemistry. My actual dream was to actually find my way into forensic science, but as we all know, life doesn't always go as planned. So I ended up struggling to find a job in the chemistry sector, and a friend of mine suggested that I get into teaching. Now, I did not want to get into teaching, but I just gave it a chance. And after I obtained my PGCE degree, I then enrolled for my honors degree, which I'm still currently doing. Now, I'm doing an honors degree in education, and my focus is in education leadership and management. Still, I'm with the University of Johannesburg. And in my honors degree, as Prof has already mentioned, I am doing a self-study research into the transition and how it affected our movement from being online to being face-to-face. And this is a problem because I felt as though my experiences were not accompanied by any resources that would help me handle the transition from going online to going face-to-face again. And the title of my research is Leading Learning Post-Lockdown, a self-study research of transitioning from online to face-to-face teaching. Now, my leadership journey began way before I even knew it had begun. I did not always have a passion for teaching, because one time in high school, after I had given a couple of my classmates a tutoring session on one of the subjects that they were struggling with, the classmate actually suggested that I take up teaching after high school. And my response to that was a big fat no. And I just said, no, 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 I'm not becoming a teacher. And most of this response was based off of what I would see with my dad, because my dad is a teacher and he had been in the teaching industry for a long time, and it just felt like it's a lot of unnecessary stress. So once I struggled to find a job, I then figured out that I can actually go into teaching. And I thought, since while I'm good at it, I might as well. So at this point, I actually like to believe that although I didn't have a passion for teaching, I actually had a calling for it, and the passion came after. Now, the PGCE that I did do, it prepared me only, or rather so much, of 21st century learning, as well as fourth industrial revolution and how to handle the workspace in the fourth industrial revolution. Now, my teaching career, on the other hand, it began in January of 2020. And this began when I took a job as an intern at another private school in Rosebank. The name of the school was Kingsmead College. Now, when I took this position, a few months into the position, this was around March, the country was sent into a national lockdown. So now I only had 3 months to get into the position. And in those 3 months, I was mostly doing observational work. So I didn't even get an opportunity to be practicing my pedagogy and practicing my delivery and practicing my teaching skills so much. So we were immediately thrust, like thousands of other schools, we were immediately thrust into the online teaching space. Now, the real work for me began last year when I got a job at the school that I'm currently working. Now, it became a challenge for me because although my PGCE, which is a postgraduate certificate in education, prepared me for the 21st century teaching and the fourth industrial revolution, I already had an idea that technology can be incorporated into the school, but I had no idea how to take all of that which I had learned and use it to lead learning in a crisis. So that's where I found myself a little bit struck into how am I going to do this? I had only experienced online learning secondhand because we were sent into online learning while I was an intern. I wasn't given much of leadership role there. I was mostly just learning the skill and learning the trade rather than actually practicing it. So when I joined ESTA, the school was trying to reintegrate learners back into the physical classroom. The students were coming to campus, but the only thing was that they had a designated area in which they had to sit. So we had all the different phases and all the different grades sitting in a specific area in a specific chair. And this was done in order to reduce the spread of the virus. So the kids would come in physically to school, but the teacher would not actually be in the classroom with them. The teacher would be in a separate room conducting the lessons on Google Classroom. And this was still, even though the kids were still excited about coming to school, it was still not giving them the full social experience of being at school because they still couldn't interact with their friends the way that they always had. They couldn't hug each other. They couldn't sit next to each other. They couldn't speak to each other without a mask on. So it became a little bit of a problem because the kids had hope, like the teachers, that this transition would be the main transition that takes us back to normal education. But as it turns out, before we can have a final transition, we had to go back online and then on campus again, and then back online again 2 more times before the final transition could actually happen. So this, you can imagine, had a toll on the teachers as well as it did on the learners. I'm sorry. So when we finally made the transition, the final transition, which was in the third term of 2021, this was around September last year, I made a couple of observations. Now, I observed that the learners were hardly enthusiastic about being there. They really did not show any, or they just showed very little interest to the lessons. It wasn't like the kids that I had met, even though I had met them online, but it was almost as if they didn't want to be there. Now, I thought this might have been due to my absence, because at some point during the year, I had to leave the learners and I had to take maternity leave. And I thought maybe this is why they're just feeling like, oh, you were gone for so long. So now we just need to get used to you again, because we were just getting used to you when you were leaving. But it turns out they were just out of their element. Now, the students refused. They literally refused to engage with me. You would ask them, are you understanding? They would keep quiet. Do you not understand? They'd keep quiet. Should I move on? They keep quiet. So they literally refused to engage with me in the lessons, and they would slant in their chairs. Some of them would daydream, and some of them would just look out the window. They had very little focus in the classroom, and they really just preferred to bury their faces in their phones rather than to engage with me, their teacher, or each other. So when we finally returned to campus, we saw that there were a lot of students that also struggled with being back on campus. Some students had anxiety attacks, some had panic attacks, some were struggling academically, some were just socially disconnected from the teachers and from the other students. Now, there's an article by Thomas's in which he states that as our students come back to in-person school, the extent of the year's trauma, the hunger, the instability, the substance abuse, the violence, and the loss, they will all become clear. Now, this is true because we saw this at our school when kids refused to come to school, when we made it mandatory for them to actually attend school physically. Because at some point when we were making the transition, we tried to ease the transition for them by saying, if you prefer to not be online, to not be on campus, you have the option of still attending your lessons online. Now, once we did that, there came a point where school physical attendance was mandatory. And in that regard, some students blatantly refused, and whoever came and was still not okay with being there, they would have anxiety attacks, some would have panic attacks, and we would have to do a little bit of damage control, which in all honesty, we aren't really qualified for as teachers. Now, being faced with the disinterested students, I was at a loss of what to do. I needed to capture their attention enough to make sure that they actually learned something instead of just talking at them and just throwing a lot of information at them, which they were not taking in. Now, I needed to find a way to get them excited about science again. I needed to get a way to get them to engage, a way to keep them awake and out of the rut that they had comfortably settled into. Now, I had to redefine my entire pedagogy as to make it suitable for effectively leading learning during the pandemic, because we were still in the pandemic. They had a lot to deal with. Mind you, I work in a high school, but I mostly teach grade 7s to 9s. Now, these are kids that are still going through puberty. Now, we had to make sure that we are handling all the puberty stages and every other emotional trauma that they may be going through, because at this point, everything to them is exaggerated. So I needed to redefine my pedagogy so that they can feel like I can relate to them, so that they can feel comfortable. They can feel like I'm ready to go back physically to school because I know I will be safe there. So I needed to find all the different ways in which my pedagogy can be redefined in order to suit the new normal that we are now being faced with. Essentially, I like to think I was in the middle of two pandemics. I was in the middle of pubescent teens and in the middle of a disease, a virus that was infectious and causes havoc and anxiety in people. So I started planning my lessons to be more engaging than before. So I'm a very physical teacher. I like to be very practical because I feel like science is a practical thing. I can literally point to the outside and say, that's the science that we'll be doing in this class. I can literally just take them outside and have our entire lesson outside. So I started to plan my lessons that way, to make them a little bit more practical, to make them a little bit more engaging than I used to do. I incorporated tangible and relatable analogies to my lessons in order to keep them captivated. I also realized that speaking to them in a language that they speak amongst themselves was an effective way of getting them to engage and understand the content. Because another effect of a poor transition from moving from online to face again is that the students struggle to actually learn anything because they're so stressed out about the transition itself that they don't have the capacity to do any learning. Now, we are now living in a new normal. And this new normal, you have to find a way as a teacher to assist your students in making the movement. Because in essence, I needed to transition, and in transitioning, I still needed to think about my students who I was transitioning with. So I found a way to make use of my 21st century skills and my fourth industrial revolution skills to make lessons interactive and fun. I also decided to get a teacher's evaluation in order to find out what I am doing wrong in the transition. I had a heart-to-heart with my students. I asked them, so how are you guys feeling about the whole movement? How is it that I made the movement more difficult, or the school made the movement more difficult? How is it that the transition has treated you? How are you feeling about the entire situation? I had a little bit of a conversation. I actually asked the kids at one point to write down what their ideal teacher is. Like, if you said, I have a favorite teacher, what would this teacher be like? How would this teacher be helping you through the transition? Now, as I'm studying for my honors degree, my research is centered around the entire transition from going online to face-to-face and post-lockdown education. I'm not yet looking at post-pandemic education because we are still within the pandemic. So we still have to consider everything that is happening around us within the pandemic. So as I look at the transition from online learning to face-to-face learning, my experience has informed my research a lot, because I see that there is not much being said about what we can and what we should be doing in this time. So I figured if I can't have anything that assists me through this transition, maybe this research will be the one thing that other teachers have to help them through this transition. Now, after all the damage control has been done, which we are very far in the education sector, because we see that there's a lot that needs to still be done. There's countless literature around the initial transition from face-to-face to online teaching and learning. Countless. If you type in anything at all about transitioning during a pandemic, all the articles that comes up, or most of the articles that come up, are about transitioning from face-to-face to online, because this is what everybody was talking about when the pandemic hit. We are in a crisis. We are thrown into a loop. So now I had to find literature that supports my research, which was very minimal. I did find a few articles that made predictions and highlighted student opinions about post-lockdown education. Now, in these few, I learned that a lot of students have similar experiences and similar opinions and similar feelings about the whole transition. Now, an article published by the New York Times it highlighted most of the students. So this was a kind of like a blog article where somebody put the notice out and said to students all around the world, tell us what you feel. Tell us how you feel about the transition that you had to do now that the pandemic is wearing down and things are calming down a little bit. Tell us how you feel. So in one of these articles, a lot of the students, they highlighted that they're not very enthusiastic about coming back to school. They don't feel that they should be in school because they feel like if they can learn from home in their beds, in their pajamas, what's the point of going to school? A lot of them feel like they are more enthusiastic about being physically at school because they miss the social aspect of it. Other students mentioned that they found themselves being more introverted coming into the transition from being online to being face-to-face. They're feeling a little bit overwhelmed with having to be around a lot of people all at the same time. Others mentioned that they are unable to work in school, or that they are less productive having come back to school because when they're at home, they can just blast their music and study as they want to study. Some of them mentioned that prior to the pandemic, they did not have any anxiety issues. They did not have any panic attacks, but having coming to school now, they have developed those social issues. They've developed those anxiety issues. Now, our kids are buried in their screens most of the time. They prefer the screens than anything else in the world. They have no interest in social learning, let alone social interactions. So we thought we would just slide right back into the normal schooling education system. But as Kim stated in one of his articles, previously decentralized and distributed online course development and student support functions will be centralized, subject to institutional planning and course campus governance. Management of online learning will be integrated into existing academic leadership structure and processes. Now, I can speak to this because now, with the pandemic looming, ESCA had already been trying to incorporate a lot more technology into the school system. Now, with the pandemic hitting, all the pandemic did for ESCA was it propelled it into something that it was already heading into. So instead of driving at 10 kilometers per hour, we were now driving at 100 kilometers per hour because we were just propelled into something that we were already looking into. Now, these are a few of my student testimonies. I have two students here. So one is Gianluca Rivetti and the other is Zara Wannenberg. You can see a picture of Gianluca here, but you cannot see a picture of Zara because she's one of the students who felt a little bit insecure and she did not appreciate, or rather she preferred for me not to share her picture. This is Gianluca's testimony about his experiences with the transition.
The sound is not playing, Humotso.
Okay, let me just play it with my phone.
Sorry, you need to stop share and then just select the share sound. Then it will play.
Oh, okay. So I have to stop the share.
Then when you reshare it at the bottom left, it says share sound.
Okay.
You click on it and then it will share the sound.
Oh, okay. I see it now. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to start this from the beginning. I'm sorry.
Personally, I preferred to be physically at school than online. This is because I felt that being with my classmates and teachers in person at school was more comfortable and easier for me. For example, over time, staying at home constantly made me feel bored and unexcited for every new day online. Although I was able to cope with this transition, when I felt this way, it made me less productive on some days. However, being at school made me feel more motivated because I felt that I was in a real workspace. I would say that you made the transition easier.
And this is Zara's testimony.
I had a pretty hard time coming back to school physically because I'd become so accustomed to being online. When I came back to school physically, it was hard for me. I mean, I got to saw my friends because I wasn't allowed, in 2020, I wasn't allowed to come to school because my mom was scared of COVID and for safety reasons and stuff. But then they made it mandatory to come to school in 2021 last year. So I came to school and got to see my friends and stuff. That was nice, I guess. But then we went back online and it was a struggle because I was used to being in person and I was used to being I was used to being online, and then we came back, and then I was used to in-person school, and then I had to go back online, which was really difficult, and it was just like, I don't know, it's just a pattern of going on and offline, and I didn't really like that. When I got back to school, I thought, hey, this is going to be the same, but I lost social skills. Yeah, I kind of lost some friends. I feel like science with you was easy, but for the first term, and then you left to go on maternity leave, and then you came back from maternity leave, and science was just a lot easier. So the transition, I guess, it was also on again, off again, because you were there and then you weren't, and then you came back. So, I mean, the transition was easier, I would say. I had a pretty...
Okay, so in conclusion, I want to say, in science, we have some chemical reactions that are reversible. Now, my experience taught me that the transition between going online and face-to-face teaching and learning is a reversible reaction, because most of the challenges that we faced when we had to move from face-to-face to online are similar to the challenges that we are facing now as we have to move from online to face-to-face. For instance, when we had to move from face-to-face to online, students really did not feel like doing any work because they are used to a home or their rooms being the space at which they relax. But now all of a sudden, they have to take their laptops and be buried in their screens and actually pay attention while their bed is sitting right there. But currently, having to come to school is a dread because they got so comfortable in their own spaces that they were able to actually learn from home, and they no longer saw the need to physically go into school. I hope my research and experience, it encourages a broader system that encourages effective learning and teaching post-pandemic. The kind of teacher I am now is a teacher that knows how to apply their 21st century skills, their fourth industrial revolution skills, their psychology skills to the minimum, and how to empathize, how to create an encouraging environment, how to create an environment of learning, even amidst a pandemic and a crisis that creates anxiety in everybody's lives. I want to take the opportunity to thank each and every single person in attendance today for taking the time out of their day to listening and paying attention to the level of degree that you did. And thank you so much for Prof. Kat and the Kagiso Trust for this opportunity. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that amazing contribution, and also, for you sharing your student voices. It was particularly interesting for us to hear the deliberation and the confusion that students felt as they had to, straddle, the different modes of learning, depending on the situation as they found themselves in. So really, thank you so much. What I do want to point out, colleagues, is that we have this most amazing engagement that's happening in the chat space right now. And I really want to thank Derek for drawing to our consciousness some of the more important questions. So the poll that we had given in the beginning was just really centered around getting a feeling of where everybody was at in terms of getting back into teaching and learning post the pandemic. And we saw the results as it came up. But Derek is asking a really more fundamental question. And this is really centered around how are teachers feeling about their preparation in terms of reinventing what they do in terms of teaching and learning post the pandemic. So I've asked our IT people to set up a Mentimeter that maybe just gives us a little bit of a feeling of how people, have adapted themselves, and whether, the experiences of COVID had changed the way in which they had now had to tackle teaching and learning in their classroom. As you can see for Homotso, one of the big issues that she dealt with as a science teacher that required a lot of social constructivist learning is that suddenly the engagement online had desocialized or created a kind of lack of ability for students to actually engage with other students. And as the learner, the second learner alluded to, she had lost friends and she had lost contact with people, and now coming back was again this process of having to settle back into getting to know people all over again and so forth. So Bhavik, I don't know if you managed to set up that Mentimeter question that we can just put up before we get our next speaker. I don't know if you can just maybe put up that Mentimeter. Are you ready, or do you need more time?
It's on the chat. Sorry.
Perfect. So guys, in the chat, you're going to find a link to a Mentimeter. And the question that we're asking there, particularly for the teachers in the room, is one that we want to acknowledge is a question that Derek is asking, which we really appreciate his contribution to our program today, is whether you felt prepared to reinvent yourself into your classroom and into the kind of teaching and learning that you must do post the COVID-19 pandemic. And after our next speaker, we'll put up the results of that Mentimeter. Again, there has been some very engaged conversation around this disconnect that people have been feeling. And we've heard now from a teacher who kind of hit the ground running with COVID, had to reinvent herself in many, many ways, and continues to do so as she engages and becomes more grounded in her work as a teacher. But now we get a different voice, a voice that's a little bit of a different nature. And now we talk to Mr. Lotus Bukubje, who is a circuit manager. Now, you can imagine that teachers in their classrooms were already having huge difficulties, but then you now have principals and leadership who have to now navigate the space of coming back into classes and how to lead teaching and learning within their school. And Lotus started his circuit manager career taking care of 33 schools. He got back in 2022 and one of his colleagues fell ill and he was suddenly thrust with 66 schools. So this gentleman who's sitting here with a big smile actually is taking care of 66 schools. So really hats off to you, Lotus. And he's also doing his PhD in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and how this has impacted a leader's learning agility and what does that look like. So without further ado, we hear from the desk of a circuit manager in Limpopo. A very warm welcome to you, Lotus. I leave the floor to you to give us your perspective.
Yeah, good afternoon, Prof. Good afternoon, colleagues. I need to share my slides with you here. I need to share my slides with you. Oh, shit. Okay. Please help me out, guys. Right, Prof, are you able to see my slides? Prof?
We are able to see your slides, Lotus, but maybe go to the first slide. That's wonderful. Thanks.
All right. That would be wonderful. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, Professor Kate, Dr. Nehemiah, and the rest of the guys who are present here today. My name, as you can see on the first slide there, I am Lotus Pukubi, a PhD candidate under the supervision of Professor Kate Sim. My story is one coming to you from the rural province of Limpopo. As it has been announced already, I'm a circuit manager. I'm looking after principals, and principals, you know, they are the culture builders. They are the people who would essentially make things to function at a school. So like it has already been mentioned in the introductions by Dr. Siyama, we are faced with a big problem. The after effects of COVID, even though we're not off the woods as yet, we are struggling. I am overwhelmed with the work that I do every day, trying to support principals of schools. 66 as they are, I have to see to it that we support them in all areas of leadership and management. But you all know, ladies and gentlemen, that there were new educational policies and regulations that were put in place that included the adjustment of the academic timetables, the new teaching programs, you know, all those things, the mode of delivery, the catch-up, you know, of the curriculum, the safety measures, and all those related things. And all these things, we have to contend with them at this point in time, because we really have to see to it that schools are running as normal, in the new normal sense of the way. So we are all aware that there's been remote learning programs that were designed. And I could hear from my colleague, Khomutso, who was presenting now. As he was presenting there, I could see the two different worlds. I could see the urban-rural divide that it's happening. A lot of things that she was mentioning there, I'm appreciative of them. But I could see that we are far away from that. But nevertheless, we are, as one person put it there, we are actually fighting a battle against all odds. We need to transcend and win over this battle, because we are the forces on the ground. We need to interact with the learner in that deep rural area. Reverend Nebutadu, in the areas of Bochum, where I am, in the areas of Maliboho, we are contending with that, where some of the nicest things that my colleague Khomutso mentioned there are the niceties that really need to be, you know, to be provided, as if we are really going to win over the challenges that were exposed by COVID-19. So on my first slide there, ladies and gentlemen, you would see what I actually mentioned there. It's COVID slide. COVID slide is a term that is actually used to describe the learning losses that have happened since the pandemic forced schools around the world to shut their doors to in-person learning or switch to reduced schedules. The biggest problem that we have in the rural circuits that I had is that of COVID slide, ensuring that all the learning losses are being recovered in one way or another. Statistics by UNICEF indicates that the education losses, they've been huge. They've been very insurmountable. And it also shows that school children are between 75% and a full school year behind. So that is quite something to contend with in the education sector. So as a circuit now, our biggest struggle, our biggest fight is to ensure that we keep up with the gap that already exists. Because in reality, maybe we should take cue from this thing of COVID to say that the effects of COVID-19, they can be used to our advantage. They can be used as a catalyst for thinking and action in order to establish an education system that better prepares students for the digital world. My next slide indicates there now that we need not break, rather we need to bend, because the resilient world, the difficult world that we've just came out of, as explained, it's VUCA environment, it's volatile, you know, it's ambiguous, And we need to rise to this level as a circuit in the rural areas, despite the disparities that are happening, with our counterparts in the cities and elsewhere. Because COVID-19 pandemic, it has accelerated worldwide education thinking on how to reform and strengthen our education systems. This is a time where we have to rethink and, think deep about what needs to be done in order to be at a level that would make sure that we keep up with the trends of the world. Learning losses in the education sector, as well as the psychological impact on children who work with them, they need to be tackled and managed throughout the pandemic recovery. So learning losses must be removed to avoid the damages that are going to be long-term. Somebody mentioned it, he called it the generation loss. Otherwise, learners will be lost to that. The next slide, as you can see now, the big question that we're faced with in the villages here as circuit managers, it's how do we catch up? How do we ensure that the learners in the rural, deep rural, the heartland of Limpopo province and elsewhere, how do we catch up? Many schools in South Africa and the world, they're still grappling with the dilemma of how to catch up, whether instruction is delivered online, in person, or through a hybrid model. There has always been the gaps that needs to be closed. Rural schools, it's a fact that it's documented. They did not benefit from remote learning, hence we're talking of COVID slide. And then the DBE, as of now, they've got a recovery plan that includes trimming and reorganization of the curriculum that actually addresses the deviation that occurs from the original curriculum. And we are mindful that it's teachers who are now at the heart of recovery. Now, my job as a circuit manager and how I interact with the whole thing, it would start here. As a circuit manager, ladies and gentlemen, I need to mention that I am an agent of school development and support. It means that on a daily basis, when I wake up, my job is to go to schools to support principals, SGBs, and learners. But in the main, I support principals with the challenges that they have. And now that we have got COVID, it means all the solutions that I try to put in, they should be aimed in the main at addressing how we're going to close the gap that exists and how we're going to keep up with the world in terms of technology, and then encouraging principals to actually invoke, a lot of time. They invoke the technology, which would be aimed at teaching learners at their respective schools. So my job entails engaging supervision, coaching, staff development, and modeling designed to influence the thinking of the principals and the practice in actual fact. And then now we're talking of statistics of these schools. The job is overwhelming, I must say, but the learning losses, they have been very immense in all our schools because like Stats South Africa reported, less than 12% of schools in the country, they have been doing the remote learning. So the majority of our schools have not been doing that, but we need to commend the work that is done by principals in those schools. The circuits are wholly deep and rural. I meet principals, the strategy that I use in order to address issues of many principals facing one person. We use what I call each one teach one. It means if I train 5 principals on a particular thing, like your technology usage, how to do your quality management systems, and then I employ those teachers to go and teach others so that all the principals can be covered in a short period of time. So in my roadshow, in my attempt to address all this, I found that some principals are more innovative in addressing this, more than others, and being mindful as well that the majority of the principals are a bit elderly, and that I think creates a bit of a problem when it comes to utilizing the technology. As we continue here, to upskill and to reskill myself as a circuit manager, sorry, I took a conscious decision, colleagues, to be a lifelong learner, hence my PhD candidacy. And then learning on an ongoing basis affords me an opportunity like we're doing now. I can learn from my colleagues that we really have to turn things around and, leave the old and live in the present. What current trends are there, the opportunities and best practices, I'm able to learn on a daily basis and share with my colleagues, principals. Because my study, it relates very well to the job that I do. The topic is the learning agility of principals in transforming school culture for a fourth industrial world during the COVID-19 pandemic. The learning agility, I think it's a construct whose time has come. If all our principals could be learning agile, I'm sure we would see better results. We have seen lately the upward trajectory in the performance of the sector that I lead. By just influencing the principal, I see it working better because the principal is the engine room of the school. The percentages are rising like that, and the use of technology to teach and the allocation of budgets to procure devices like smart boards, projectors, and so on in our schools has of late been rising. And we have since revived the school-based support teams and the QLTCs as a way of involving the communities around the schools to support any effort that would otherwise prepare the school to be technology ready. And then some of the efforts that we take here to maximize the support for principals includes the engagements that we have on a time-to-time basis. I would personally invite other circuit managers like my colleagues, Dr. Mtapmaswendiveti, to some principals during the strategic planning session where they talk to them and encourage them to be involved in all the possibilities of making sure that their schools are rising, And then the IT guru would be invited to a session, a strategic planning session, to run through the benefits of continuing to utilize technology in order to keep up with the ongoing trends. The next slide talks to another engagement that we normally would have, just to mitigate over the learning losses. We would convene our principals where we all share, the best practices, because some of them are very good at, transcending and dealing with issues of technology, using technology in order to meet the demands of the fourth industrial revolution. So to report on new challenges that would otherwise inhibit progress, it's something that I found to be very much working on their part. And then as you can see, the next slide there, this is when I had called the gentleman in the middle there, at the back row, is Mr. Sokana, the National Teaching Award champion. This guy had demonstrated to my principal that if you go deeper, he's also from a deep rural school in Sohoses Central in the Capricorn North District, but he has actually demonstrated to them that he did not take his situation to be the one that would say, no, you are not in the city, you can't make it and all of that. So he demonstrated to them that he went to all places because he believed in technology. He used technology to transcend and to navigate his teaching, to zoom into what can be done. And we are blessed to say that the district and the department in the bought all schools, the Wi-Fi's, so it takes a very brilliant principal and an encouraged principal to do that. Mr. Sokona would at all times speak high of the benefits of integrating technology into everyday learning and teaching. Right, as you can see there on the next slide, I have a session which actually I conduct with my principals when they engage with learners, just to get a sense of how they are keeping up with what is happening now. There's the principal conducting some experiments in their makeshift laboratory, and here there's plants being planted there. These are the things that would ordinarily motivate them, learners and the teachers in the school. But it all rests in the hands of the principal, who is innovative, creative, and wanting to move to forge ahead with technology. If you can see here, as a second manager, we also engage with learners grade 12, grade 11 on many fronts, so that we can encourage them. Here we do just after the excellence celebrations, we're giving them goodies like certificates, and afterwards lunch as well, just to embolden and strengthen their belief in themselves. So the main challenge is, like you mentioned.
Lotus, I'm sorry, you have 2 or 3 more minutes left. I'm sorry, I know that there's
Okay,
a lot
Prof,
of
perfect. I'll just run through this slides. Here we mentioned earlier on that the main challenge, of course, was that of internet connectivity, but we're working on it. The next slide, which I think is very important to this session, Prof, would be to call for an action because of the challenges that we're coming across. I think it would be good to mitigate these challenges while we're also building a more resilient system that can withstand future crises. I think we are making 3 core recommendations here that in our situation, it would be good if the programs are put in place, implementing learning recovery programs, protecting education budgets, and preparing for future shocks. Maybe just to deliberate one time on each, I think these implementing recovery programs would ensure that learners who have fallen behind, they receive support and they need to catch up with the learning targets as prescribed. Then I can go to the next slide. Budgets have always been a problem in the education sector. So for now, I think it would even be more important for the department and whoever to just inject more money into the budget so that the emphasis of technology teaching through technology in our schools could be a thing of a modernized learning recovery programs. Technology and digital development must be a priority. And then finally here is what we are recommending, Prof. I would say in preparation for future shocks by building back better, we should look to the future. It is not only imperative that we recover from the pandemic, but we need to use this experience to become better prepared for future. And to support this, we need to build the capacities of the people we work around with, particularly the principals. And schools should be better prepared to switch easily between face-to-face and remote learning. So in essence here, we're saying that we need not go back to the way we have been doing things and say COVID is gone. It's possible that we are going to have another pandemic, another disaster that may actually cripple our society. So as I move to finality, the next question would be, so what does this mean for school leaders? It means that for all those principals who are ignorant, there is going to be, out of touch. The ignorant of the 21st century, as envisaged by Alvin Toffler in 1970, will be those who can't learn, relearn, and unlearn. So myself as a second manager, Prof, my focus is on leading the leaders. And as part of my own learning, I'm pursuing these studies with the hope that it will assist me a great deal. And in broad terms, learning agility, it's about knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So all the principals, I think it would be good if they have this learning agility. So learning agility encompasses all these 5 things that I mentioned here: people, result, mental change, and self-awareness, agility. And anybody, principals with whom we have actually encountered in the Sandbox project, as I was collecting data, I would find that there's a principal like Mr. Klas Matlatlani. In all honesty, I think he possesses the majority of this, dimensions of learning agility. This is a master in himself. He's the master of creativity and innovation. He showed, this by supporting his colleagues. He does he's an avid reader, he's an author of note, and he supports parents and learners in a very amazing way. He's hands-on, he does things, he goes to an extent of buying shoes for learners and many, many, many other things that an ordinary principal would not do. He thinks out of the box ordinarily. So I also went to another school. It's not only Matlatlani. We convened principals, as you can see in the picture there. It's a group of principals from whom we're collecting data. Joyce Pilani and the others. Joyce is also a highly confident principal who employs various leadership styles to navigate through all the challenges that are posed by COVID-19. And Prof, on that note, let me thank you and say, I think the urban-rural divide can be closed if the people in the rural areas can wake up and stop crying for more resources and do with what we have. And then I think in that way, we will be able to kill it and enjoy our working everywhere in the country, despite the rurality of the place. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lotus, and I'm so sorry that I had to hurry you along. There has been request for your slides and so forth, which we will definitely share. And please take note that Mr. Moore has put some really interesting questions in the chat, which we'll deliberate on a little bit, as we go into the Q&A session. But I think it was a very thought-provoking exercise that you brought to light. We'd said that we cannot wait for others. It all begins with us. And as leaders in education, we have to take charge. We also have to engage with learning in ways that become, part and parcel of the problem-solving process, and engaging not just, within offices, but also in the classroom with learners and around the innovations that need to be happening. So this concept of learning agility that you're working on definitely is high premium, and it is enabling in terms of the schools that you are working with. And we hope that that's going to transfer to other spaces as you deliberate through a research-led process. And I like the way in which you are framing your research as a PhD student within the work that you do. So my study and my, and the work that you do is really linked to the research and the space of research that you're working in. So thank you very much for that, Lotus. We will definitely get back to you with a lot of the interesting questions that are online. But in the essence of trying to catch up with time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our third and last speaker in the form of Dr. Abdulaziz Zohri. Abdulaziz joins us all the way from Morocco. So very warm welcome, Abdulaziz, to you. And we hope that you are going to give us some insights so that we here in South Africa don't feel alone as we try to grapple with this conversation around post-pandemic. Please go ahead, Abdulaziz.
Thank you, Professor Katz. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, and we can see your slides as well.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you, and I would like to thank Kagiso Trust for the invitation, mainly Professor Katz and everyone who has been working very, very hard to organize this beautiful discussion. I've been listening to the presentations. They're very rich and very inspiring indeed. And I'm here to share a few ideas based on research that I have done with a group of researchers in the MENA region. We try to understand how policy making has unfolded during COVID-19 since the beginning up to this day, and probably wanted to draw some lessons and just raise a few questions and try to at the same time have discussion around a few questions that this presentation raises. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. The title, as you see it, is Education Policy Making in Turbulent Times, a change management perspective based on the conclusion that we have drawn from the study. So try to focus on how change management can a little bit try to feed our thinking in terms of how policy making needs to learn from this crisis, or the crisis of COVID-19. The outline is going to focus first on defining turbulent times. I'm not going to focus too much on this and what education, how education has been doing in turbulent times or during COVID-19. Then I'll focus on the study and the framework of the study and some of the results. And then I'll talk about how change management, as I said, can probably help us learn a few lessons based on how we can make sense of the decision and policy making in these VUCA times. Now, when we talk about turbulent times or weak times or VUCA times, which is a term used, of course, it was used in the 90s to refer to the, probably before, to the situation that the military, especially the US military, faced in the Gulf region during the war in the Gulf. So they decided that, okay, so these moments should be studied, and they used a set of words or expressions to explain that these turbulent times are characterized by lack of order, rationality, control, and predictability. So COVID-19 can be considered a turbulent time or a weak time or a VUCA time. It is also characterized by unprecedented uncertainty. So it's uncertain, everything has become uncertain. So we don't have answers for anything. So we are just confused, and this uncertainty, bears on every field in life. These times are complex. They are not just compound, but they are complex. They are unpredictable. They are open-ended, and they are intractable, and they are incomprehensible and resistant to solutions. But what is probably positive about turbulent times is that they are an easy buy-in, or they provide policymakers and whoever is intending to implement change to get an easy buy-in from the populations or the people around, and so on and so forth. So it's expressed like this by Olsen in 2015, that there is the potential for the mobilization of citizens and the awakening of the sleeping bear, which means that it's easy to rally forces towards change in turbulent times. Because of course, everyone wants to get rid of the situation. Everyone wants to go back to normal or whatever it is we might call it. And Kolko in 2012 defined wicked problems as a social or cultural problem that is difficult or impossible to solve for as many as 4 reasons. So these problems are incomplete, contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, the large economic burden, and the interconnected nature of these problems with other problems. Poverty is linked with education, nutrition with poverty, the economy with nutrition, and so on and so forth. We may illustrate the wickedness of COVID-19 in this way. It's probably a very simple way of illustrating how COVID-19 has affected our life, but we can see that it is very complex and intricate, and there is interconnectedness between a number of issues, including health, infrastructure, inequalities and injustice, impact on the poor, low social mobility, leading to school dropouts, safety problems, so schools stopped, disruption of education, inadequate policies, domestic violence, and so on and so forth. So all these things are interdependent and interconnected, and they show us how COVID-19 is a wicked problem. Now, of course, the turbulence created a huge debate over whether to close schools or not to close schools, and this is a. I think that we have talked a lot about this in different webinars and research papers and so on and so forth. But it is a very divisive issue, and this is a characteristic of complex issues, that they are very divisive. So some people wanted to go back to schools, saying I can go to gym but not school. So just showing how some countries are confused. They're opening gyms while they are closing schools, while schools are essential. Or some people they think that schools save lives, so we should close schools to save lives, or we should open schools because they are important, and so on and so forth. So you know about the debate. Now the dilemma, of course, is particularly challenging for education, because school environments risk high rates of COVID-19 and during the pandemic, and closures are seen as unnecessary measures to protect public health. So as necessary measures to protect public health. But while the linkages between schools and children's health, safety, and life prospects are significant, because we know that some students got help or health service at schools, or they got food at schools. And we know that when we closed schools, a lot of students were affected. Now, when it comes to the study that we conducted, we wanted to answer a set of questions that you see in this slide. So the objectives, of course, were to understand the underlying mechanisms of education policy making and the decisions of Minister of Education and Higher Education during the pandemic. Based on these research questions, what education policy and decisions has Moroccan Ministry of Education and Higher Education implemented during COVID-19? What are the underlying mechanisms of these policies and decisions in terms of context, content, process, and actors? And how can the Cunnivan framework or the Cunnivan model account for this policy? And the framework that we use is the policy analysis triangle by Walton and Gilson in 1994. And we focused on the context, the actors, the content, and the process in order to try to understand what made this policy the way it is. Now, of course, we conducted a thematic analysis of a number of documents by the Ministry of Education and from journalists, from organizations, to try to understand what was the policy making based on, and what effect has it had on the population and the students as well. As you see, so we focus on two waves. The first wave, when COVID-19 broke, it was characterized by a different context, because the situation was worrisome due to what was happening in neighboring European countries and the high levels of uncertainty about the virus. But in Morocco, for example, and in most MENA region countries that we studied, there was a low number of COVID cases. So the first COVID cases just appeared, but focus was mainly on safety and the belief that closing all schools would help contain the virus, while the content was closing schools until further notice, turning to distant learning through internet and media, and broadcasting lessons through TV, and promises to activate an online learning platform in most of the countries we studied. And if we look at the process of the agenda, the development and the implementation, the agenda was characterized by the government's gathering and deciding to take early action against the spread of COVID-19, including a total lockdown, while the development was about decisions taken to close all schools and education institutions and move to distance online learning upon recommendations from the Minister of Health and assessment of the situation in neighboring countries, based on an assessment of the situation in neighboring countries. And the implementation was taken by the Minister of Education, who issued a short notice ministerial note to all academies and schools to close the next day, and teachers and parents were given the role of overseeing the continuation of the children's education. While the actors, it was a very government-centered or centralized decision-making or elite-centered decision-making, where a small number of individuals took hold of authority and started issuing directives. And I think it's very common in turbulent times to do this. But what this gave us as a result is that we saw that the impact of the disruption. So we were dealing with a crisis, but another crisis was created. So that crisis has exacerbated pre-existing education disparities by reducing the opportunities for many of the most vulnerable children, youth, and adults. And we have seen that some presentations have talked about this impact, this negative impact on kids at different levels in different regions, and how many kids in the world were impacted. Now, of course, the UN, or the United Nations, UNICEF, and other organizations, they warned against the impact, the huge impact of the emergency. And as we see here from UNICEF, that as we approach the 1-year mark of the COVID-19 pandemic, so at the beginning of 2021, so we are again reminded of catastrophic education emergency worldwide lockdowns have created. So it has created another emergency, with every day that goes by children unable to access in-person schooling fall further and further behind, with the most marginalized paying the heaviest price. And we cannot afford to move into year 2 of limited or even no in-school learning for these children. And now effort should be spared to keep schools open. And why I'm sharing this, because in Morocco, when we studied the policy making, we found that in some MENA region countries, the decision to go back to schools was based on these results from international organizations. So because of the warnings that were raised by these organizations, the Minister of Education decided to go back to school. You see this in, before that we may look at how COVID-19 impacted students and how the disruption of education impacted students. We see that it has impacted 8.9 million learners in Morocco, including 6.2 million primary and secondary education students. And then the problem, instead of coming up with a solution, I mean the confinement, we came up with another a more wicked problem, where based on the problem that rose out of school disruption, like connectivity issues, pedagogical issues, capacity issues, learning skills issues, social issues, learning environment issues, and so on and so forth. So the list, of course, is so long. And during the second wave, so trying to deal with the second crisis or this emergency of disruption, we have seen that things have changed a bit. Even if the context was different, because we had higher number of cases, And the concern for education, of course, was higher as well, as I said, based on those reports from UNESCO, WHO, and research, and so on and so forth. There was a dissatisfaction over the outcomes of the distance teaching and learning, because it was very traditional, of course, based only on TV broadcasting and so on and so forth, building on the other countries' experiences and giving priority to learning in person. So that was the context that was expressed by the Minister of Education in changing the policy towards opening schools. And of course, the content was returned to in-person education on September 7th using an alternating cohort classes and so on and so forth. I'm not going to deal with the results here because they are not very important, but the actors changed a bit because the ministry adopted a less centralized approach, basing decisions to close schools locally on the daily assessment of COVID-19 cases inside each school. And the Minister of Education consulted school unions, parents, and some experts. And you see that the process happened this way. So meeting school unions in July, holding government's meeting, and the approach changes towards giving priority to education and learning, while asking schools to establish and implement safety measures and make decisions locally about closing schools based on a pre-established protocol. Now, but what happened is that these decisions, the decision of opening schools and the decision of bringing students back to school and so on and so forth, or going back to normalcy as it might be called, it probably created another challenge. So, it raised another question. Were we going down the rabbit hole or going down rabbit holes, as expressed by Deborah Nitoliki in one of her dialogic articles in WISE? She said that our challenge is now to ensure that our tackling of this emergency is not a dream that passes as we return and think into our previous version of normal, but we should carve out time and space to deeply consider the purpose and possibility of schooling and education before we rush back into school as we used to know it. And she said this in 2020, and in 2021, we were doing what she warned against. We were just going back to school. But today, as we see it in 2022, we are back into school as we used to know it. And that's what I see as a teacher, as a professor. And that's what I hear from my colleagues teaching, and that's what I see in my country. And I guess that's in most countries at the same time. That's what happened. Now, why? Because, well, using the metaphor from the movie The Matrix, you can either get the blue pill and dive into illusion, or get the red pill and you wake up in your bed and get back to reality. But except that for us, after this turbulent time or after this crisis, well, normality is, what is normality? So what we have today is normality. That is to say, going back to schools as they used to be, and that's it. So we forget about COVID as if it never happened, and we're back to schools, teaching the same way, doing the same things, not caring about whether we are going to have any other crisis in the future or not. But probably that's an illusion. That's not a reality. That's normalcy, but it's not. It's normality, but it's not a reality. It's an illusion. While reality is moving forward to reality, that is to say, thinking about the future and what the future holds for us, and preparing for the future. And that's why I want to reflect on how a change management perspective might help policymakers. I'm not sure if it's going to help them or not, but at least that's what I think should be done based on change management processes and the change management literature. We need to do things differently, or policymakers need to do things differently. How is that? The first thing is awareness, because without awareness, nothing will happen. So awareness is about making sense of the crisis management, or making sense of the crisis itself. What happened during COVID-19? How did we react? Why did we react the way we reacted, and how should we have reacted differently, and why? So there is this uniform framework by Snowden and Boone, 2007, that shows us how we have to deal with complex issues or chaotic situations. It tells us that when the situation is chaotic, like at the beginning, at the break of COVID-19, we shouldn't have worked on sensing or trying to understand what was going on, but we we should have acted. And that's what most countries did. They acted, but they acted based on a, they acted based on an old formula. That is to say, okay, let's go into confinement, let's close doors, let's go into distanciation and distancing ourselves from each other. And that was the solution. So that was acting. But then we needed to sense, we needed to try to understand what was going on, because at the beginning there were no relationship. We didn't understand cause effects. We just had a new situation. But we should have like worked on sensing. So we started sensing, and then we need to respond. But I think the response, what we should understand about the response is it's not just the response that we had at the beginning. That was just acting. So the response is the long-term actions we're taking in order to face a situation like this in the future, if we have a situation like this in the future. So you see the description of the framework. I'm not going to go into it. You can always go and read about the Cunningham framework. There are many articles written by researchers about the Cunningham framework and how it can be used. And the paper that we have worked on that has not been published yet, but I hope it will be published soon. It uses the Cunningham framework as a framework to explain or to discuss the results of this research. Now, the most important thing in a crisis like this, or the chaotic domain, which is synonymous with what COVID-19 presented us with, is that it is the best place for leaders to impel innovation, to just trigger innovation, to start innovating, because people are more open to novelty and directive leadership in these situations than they would be in other contexts. And we said it, that there is more buy-in. But the question is, how innovative have policymakers been in my country or in other countries or in your countries? So have they been innovative? Have they innovated when it comes to education and learning and teaching? Now we can look at this diagram that explains, the differences between people who think they know and people who know, or well, experts. When in turbulent situations, there are no experts, by the way, because it takes time, because nobody knows anything about it. But some people may say, okay, we know, so I know, so they have high confidence, they are here. And this guy on the top of the pyramid here, if you can say that, so thinks that, okay, so we're just going to go into confinement. So I know we're going to go into confinement and COVID-19 is going to abate like other crises that we have in the past, and that's it, we're going to go back to normal. But of course, it starts falling down into delusion, and you're trying to, you will see that, okay, that was a delusional, very delusional. And you need to build knowledge. So you build knowledge by trying to understand that there are many unknown unknowns, what we call unknown unknowns. That is to say, there are lots of things that we don't know that we should know, but we don't know. So these are unknown unknowns. So let's dig deep and try to learn a lot of things about policy making in turbulent times, so that we can deal with crises the way we should deal with them. Now, some countries, as you have seen, they adopted the ostriches approach, because a lot of people think of ostriches as animals who put their heads in the sand to hide from enemies, and they think that by hiding their heads they will hide from enemies, and well, just dodge and bow until the storm passes and then go back to your normal life. But with unknown unknowns, it's not possible, except that when we try to dispel the myth with ostriches, we're going to find out that ostriches do not hide their heads. They are flightless birds, and as flightless birds, they are unable to build nests in trees, so they lay their eggs in holes dug in the ground. So to make sure that the eggs are evenly heated, they occasionally stick their heads into the nest to rotate the eggs. So for regeneration, and regeneration is a very, very important term, especially when it comes to leadership. So using this concept, regenerative leadership, and if we want to use this concept of regenerative leadership and try to revitalize and renovate and innovate, and when it comes to our education systems, we first need to know what the ostriches do. I mean, adopting the ostriches policy would be, yes, dig deep holes to lay eggs and let those eggs hatch. But you have to be active. You have to be agent. You have to have that agency as a policymaker to rotate those eggs so that they hatch. And hatching is synonymous with creativity, because that's probably one of the processes of becoming creative and innovative. That is to say, so get an idea and let it hatch so that it becomes a strategy or an approach that will help you navigate the turbulent times. As a tool, there are many tools that have been used in change management processes.
Abdulaziz, I'm so sorry to interrupt your conversation. We have just two more minutes left.
Okay, so Qatar's model of change is a very, very important model, but there are other models. It's not the only one, but it's an important one to try to also understand policymaking during these turbulent times, because the first step is creating urgency. So in COVID-19, policymakers did not need to create urgency because the urgency is there. So they needed to form a powerful coalition, but it was very, very easy because, as I said, the buy-in is simple. So when they tell people, okay, we want to do this, or we need more money, we need the budget, we need to have a better budget to innovate in education, almost everybody would say, yes, let's do this. And then, but we needed a vision for change. And I think that's what was missing when I looked at when I studied the policy making in Morocco and in the 4 other MENA regions that we studied. So there was lack of vision. Well, what do we want to do? And why do we want to just reform education? And what type of policy do we have? And why do we want to implement that policy? So that was missing. And of course, the other steps, we can go through them, but yes, we don't see them in the policy making during COVID-19. So communicating the vision. If you don't have a vision, you cannot communicate. It's empowering action. Well, we have seen that teachers took the lead. Many teachers around the world took the lead and took the initiative and started sharing lessons with their students, sometimes even if they were not told to do this by the leaders, but they just did this by themselves. And a lot of teachers raised questions about whether their actions were empowered or not. And the answer, of course, was to a greater extent, their actions were not empowered because they did not have any, they were not equipped, there was no capacity building. And of course, if then you can build on the change and then you can make it stick. But I think that we are still stuck at the second level, forming a powerful coalition, and the third of creating a vision. So we are not there yet. And if we are able to do this, if we are able to implement change the way it is, what we are going to do is, instead of predicting, which is like outdated, today the world is moving so fast, we need to anticipate. So we need to anticipate that there is a crisis that is going to come, probably a turbulent situation that is going to come. So anticipate it and prepare for it right now, today, not tomorrow. So we need to focus on empowering instead of controlling teachers, instead of controlling principals, instead of controlling schools. We need to empower them. We need to focus on responding and experimenting, that is to say, becoming creative, and just let people experiment with different ways of teaching, different ways of educating, and not just give them instructions and tell them that's what you should do and you should not go beyond these limits, instead of planning, and then focus on learning and evolving instead of stagnating. So of course, policymaking in turbulent times, as it is said by Kettle 2008, describing governments and how they deal with it, he said that government organizations are good at implementing policies and delivering services that are relatively standardized, routine and highly volume, but they seem to be less well equipped to respond effectively to non-routine and standard service challenges. Not unexpectedly, some public officials find it challenging to handle the more difficult problems facing them. This is especially true of what have been called wicked problems, those that are complex and predictable, open-ended, or intractable. At first sight, grappling with wicked problems might seem like taking up lost causes. And yes, it's true to some extent that some governments have been unable to deal with this crisis. But what is worse is that even today, as we see it, we feel like there is nobody who cares about what happened. So let's just go back to normalcy, and that's it. Oh, Peter Drucker, who is, so I still have probably 2 slides and then I'll end my presentation. So Peter Drucker said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And I guess that if we want to deal with the situation today, we need to stop acting with today's logic Today's logic is just, okay, let's go back to normalcy, and that's it. Now, I don't think we should stop here. We need to reflect on these experiences, because the most important thing about experiences is reflection about experiences. How have we dealt with this experience, and what have we learned? So there are lots of things we can learn from this experience, but I'll skip this because it's about a number of misassumptions or misconceptions that we might have built through this crisis. But go back to these conclusions. So the conclusion that we should draw, at least some conclusions, we need to first unlearn and then relearn. So we have learned about COVID-19, but we haven't unlearned a lot of things, and we need to relearn many other things to deal with education policy in the right way. One of them is that the present is complex, but the future will be more complex than ever. Tomorrow's education problems will not be solved by yesterday's or even today's solutions. Teachers have agency, but leaders and policymakers should be accountable and walk the talk. Safety is important, but without education, our future is anything but safe. You cannot fake it until you make it in education policy. You either make it or you will break it. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Wow, Abdulaziz, I think that you have really set the entire house on fire. Please do have a look at the chat. There's just so much that people have appreciated. And particularly, I have appreciated the fact that all of your thinking has allowed us to realize that, we are not alone, at least in the way we're thinking and in the way we're experiencing this time that we have in our hands, that the rest of Africa, yourself included, and the other MENA countries, but perhaps more generally, the rest of the world is also contemplating over exactly the same issues. So I just like all speakers to please go into the chat and just respond to people that have, really engaged well in the chat. And what I would like to say is a lot of people had asked, well, why aren't we having a teacher's perspective? Why aren't we having, a policy perspective? And I must say that I'm so grateful that we brought all of these perspectives in. But the way in which I'd like to bring together the learnings of today is I'm going to ask Dr. Latola, who's our poet, in a different kind of way, because he would have picked and chosen things to render for us in poetry form, some of the learnings that we have encompassed today. But Abdulaziz, thank you so much for a very thought-provoking, experience. And again, we are all ostriches in some ways, but maybe, just maybe, we are not just butting our heads. We are moving eggs around to try and, make sense of the change. So thank you very much for your contribution. Nehemiah, I don't know if you managed to collate something for us, but we're very keen and eager with this experiment to try and see if poetry can bring all the learnings together.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ket. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I must say that this has been a very exciting, very fruitful venture to be engaged with. I have been frantically taking notes and frantically theming my side. So I'd love to share with you in this form of poetry the learnings that I have garnered from today. The piece is structured in 4 stanzas, the first 2 dealing with students and the last dealing with teachers, as the speakers have so coordinately been speaking. So there's no title, so let's go with fragments from education conversations. Are you good with that, Prof? Okay. Okay. They have not just happened. They have not just been. They are children tightly wound up in the seams of histories of what we have, of where we have been, swirled together, uprooted in a cough, a breath, a fever's hot dream. They carry a new story, one we've all seen. So meet them around the embers of what has been. Just strike a match. You'd be surprised of what you'll see. Lay aside labels. Children are more than this COVID that has been. A technologically advanced learner ready to meet the world. But let's not forget the teacher, myself and my colleagues, who have been on a ledge letting go of the normal day-to-day traveling this neutral zone. We have arrived at new beginnings, collectively and collaboratively learning and inspiring student success. So, as you foster and feed young minds, remember to yourself to be kind. Meet the call to action, being learning agile leaders to build back better, resilient 4IR-led systems capable of withstanding future crises. Turbulent, weakened times may lack order, rationality, control, and predictability, but they also offer opportunity to bring about change. So dispel the various myths, craft a clear vision. Teachers are pivotal to alleviating human suffering. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Nemaya. I'm sure everybody is applauding. You really brought together everybody's voice.
Wow.
Different
Wow.
nuances. So I can hear Lotus wowing on that side. And I know that Abdul Aziz picked up the wicked problems that came from his presentation and the lack of rationality and so forth. I loved what you've done. And I'm so glad that this experiment, has worked. But I'm afraid that time has really clobbered on, guys. And, so we couldn't really have too much of an engaged conversation, some questions and answers. But please, presenters, if you look at the chat, and please just take the courtesy of answering some of the questions that have come on there from people, in there. I'm not sure if there's a moment for us, Bhavik, to just please put up that Mentimeter before we go over to the closing message. Bhavik, I don't know the previous Mentimeter of Derek Moore. I don't know if you want to just maybe pull that up.
Sorry, do you want the previous Mentimeter results, or
The
do you
previous,
want us to
the
do that
previous
last
results, just for us to just, acknowledge that people have responded, and for us to then see what the responses have been like before I hand over to Dean Zoe.
second?
Okay, so Derek's question that really went into whether teachers felt sufficiently prepared to reinvent their teaching practices during COVID-19. And so we've got 5 people who have responded to this. And I think it's been mixed feelings in some ways. So what I can see is that some people felt not sufficiently prepared. Others have felt that they were in a neutral zone. And then some others, thought that they were somewhat able to prepare themselves, but that, a lot needs to be done. So technically, I think that we are sitting with a mixed bag of feelings around whether people were feeling sufficiently prepared. But I think what is important here is that it's not so much about whether we would like to reinvent ourselves, but the fact that we have to reinvent ourselves, and how we grapple with that, only time will tell. So a lovely, conversation already happening here on the Mentimeter as well. Thank you so much, Bhavik, for this. And so that leaves us with a Kagiso Trust board member in the form of Dean Zoe, who will then, grace us with the closure for this webinar. Over to you, Dean.
Thank you very much. From the quality of the presentations which have been made, my task is very easy this afternoon. It is evident from the presentations that we cannot return to the world as it was before. And these conversations are meant to make sure that we rethink education and we take advantage of the learnings of the past 2 years. I had a heartfelt thank you to all our presenters, as I've indicated, for such quality presentations. They've taken time to prepare, it was quite evident, and share their opinions. Heartfelt thank you to our Kagiso Trust, Board of Trustees who are here. I'm not sure who all of are here, but I understand the chairperson of the board might be here, Mema Nkoni Ntaba, Tabiso Ratsomo, and maybe there could be others whom I might not have seen on the list there. Thank you very much to our partner University of Johannesburg, and a special thank you to our program director, Prof. You were amazing. Prof is invested in these conversations, researching the topics. You assist us with choosing the presenters, as well as engaging with all the presentations fully. Unfortunately, this is virtual. If it was physical, I was going to request for a round of applause, a resounding one. And thank you very much to all those who attended the lecture, both it was a virtual lecture. I'm sure you will take away a great deal from what we have had today. And the key question is, how do we reimagine the education system that can withstand any crisis? I think that is a tall order, but it is a question that we need to deal with and face head on. The recording of this session and presentations will be available on the Kagiso Trust and the University of Johannesburg website. The conversations will continue on social media, and we are always hopeful that one good conversation will shift the direction of change forever. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Zoe, and we really were blessed to have you in our company today. Again, a really huge thanks to everybody who participated, especially to our audience who were just robust in including and giving their fingerprint into the conversation. And again, these conversations, as we always say, don't end here. It's a call to action. It's where do we go to from here, wherever we find ourselves in the space of education, and how then do we action some of our learnings from here. Abdulaziz, a special thank you to you for being a part of us today and for blessing us with the knowledge that most definitely we are not alone in this endeavor. Have a beautiful afternoon, everybody, and we look forward to our next conversation. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.